What's up, guys? Tony here from Epic. Today we're going to be talking about the effects of marijuana and marijuana derivatives on athletic performance. This is going to be an overview of current research to see where the scientific community really stands on this stuff currently. So, no surprise, marijuana is increasing globally as a social drug. It's also got some perceived therapeutic benefits and physical and cognitive benefits as well. In the United States, at least, there's plenty of effort being made to decriminalize the possession of marijuana for a number of reasons. And cannabis globally is probably the biggest, most commonly used drug next to tobacco and alcohol. So the purpose of this presentation is to explore its uses in the exercise performance domain. And we're not advocating for or against the use of marijuana. That's an individual decision that each person is going to have to make. That's not what this is about. We're strictly looking at athletic performance enhancing potential. So just to start off briefly with the chemical makeup and the physiological effects of cannabis, I've seen different numbers with the amount of cannabinoids in cannabis. The biggest number I've seen is over 140. Other research shows somewhere around 100. So you're looking at well over 100 identified cannabinoids so far in cannabis. The two most studied are going to be your delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, and your cannabidiol, which is CBD. THC has the psychoactive, psychotropic, intoxicating effects, and they bind to the CB1 receptors in your brain and in your central nervous system. CBD is non-intoxicating and has an antagonistic effect against the CB1 and CB2 receptors. The pharmacological effects of CBD aren't completely understood as of yet. These are the two big, the most common components that you'll see advertised for cannabis is the THC and CBD. So, potential desired effects. Proposed benefits could be relaxation, anxiety reduction, improved sleep. These are probably the most common reasons why someone would be taking cannabis or cannabis products, just in general. Intoxicating effects, yes, the high effect, but therapeutic-wise and any potential improvements to athletic performance, they're going to be mostly related to some aspect of recovery, usually reducing anxiety and improving sleep. There's some research to suggest that cannabis can increase the pain threshold. We've seen this in the research with multiple sclerosis patients, with cancer patients, other types of neuropathy, and even in the athletic domain and endurance sports. Their ability to push past a certain point is shown to be a little bit better when consuming cannabis. There's also some small amount of bronchodilation in the respiratory tract. When compared to asthma medications, it's shown to be slightly less effective, and those medications don't have the same side effects that cannabis would have. So to say that it is automatically a good substitute for, say, asthma medication for an asthma patient, not really something you would want to rely on compared to prescribed medications for asthma. So again, for the endurance athletes, it's shown to have given them a little bit more of the ability to push past some pain tolerance there. And so what are people looking for this? Again, it's anxiety reduction and different aspects of recovery improvements. So there's a study conducted just recently, and the top 3 responses, these are jiu-jitsu competitors, active jiu-jitsu competitors from around the world. The top 3 responses for taking THC products, cannabis, were improved sleep, anxiety reduction, and recovery. And these are anecdotal, but it's still, I think it's worth noting that that's what people are taking it for. And even the CBD products, the same responses, sleep, recovery, and anxiety, were the top 3 reasons why people were taking them to begin with. So if you take that information and you look at it, you say they're not taking it specifically for improvements to their athleticism or their athletic performance. It's about recovering so they can go train again. And that's pretty common. If you've trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for any length of time, you probably come across the guys that like to, they're very big advocates for smoking marijuana, because they feel it calms them down and allows them to focus, quiet the noise down in their head, and allows them to focus, and they feel it helps them with a net positive with their athletic performance. Aside from that, there has been research conducted that cannabis is just generally, it's a CNS, it depresses the CNS across the board. So that alone will help you relax and potentially increase your sleep and your recovery from that alone. Other reasons people responded to the survey for taking THC or non-THC products was because of relief from mental health concerns, whether they were diagnosed or undiagnosed. And I think, it's outside my scope to really dive into mental health concerns here and its relation to cannabis, but it at least highlights the point that there is a perceived benefit from it through anecdotal reports from different people saying they're going to clear their head a little bit. The reduction in anxiety, I think, goes in the same category. There is at least a perceived benefit that people are getting from this with mental health issues. So one point for the psychotropic effects for THC and why it is perceived to be so helpful. In the exercise world, we get something called the runner's high from endurance sports. You hear about it all the time. That release of endorphins is what's providing that runner's high. The same methods are thought to be involved in the dopamine release from THC. So it's kind of one and the same there regarding that. So adverse effects. There are no shortage of adverse effects from cannabis consumption. So contrary to what we may have been told, or what your friends or what have you, what they tell you, there are absolutely negatives, adverse health effects to consuming cannabis. Just some of the more popular ones: tachycardia, which is an increased heart rate, changes in your resting blood pressure, changes in orthostatic control. So when you change positions rapidly, your blood pressure isn't able to keep up with that change in elevation, so you get a little bit lightheaded, and respiratory sensitivity and bronchodilation. For an asthmatic, bronchodilation can be a good thing when they're having an attack, but that's not something that we want to chronically have, is this bronchodilation. If you don't need it, let your body take care of that on its own. Inducing bronchodilation just for the sake of doing it may not be quite as helpful as it seems. That said, these effects seem to diminish over time. acute use shows all these side effects. Chronic use, while there are some health concerns to go along with that, when people develop a tolerance, some of these adverse effects seem to go away. The more concerning method of consuming cannabis seems to be in the smoking. You see smoking marijuana and smoking tobacco compared a lot. The problem is it's not a good equivalency to compare the two. Smoking tobacco, cigarettes, generally people consume on average somewhere around 20 cigarettes a day. And with smoking marijuana, it's closer to 3. So right at the top, you might look at that and say, well, you're smoking less overall, which is true. The problem is that when you smoke tobacco, you don't generally hold that smoke in. With marijuana, especially experienced marijuana consumers, they take bigger puffs and they hold the smoke in their lungs for a longer period of time compared with tobacco. So you're still consuming the harmful effects like the carbon monoxide, for example, and you're exposing your lungs to that for a longer duration. So to say that it is automatically safer than smoking tobacco, it doesn't make any sense. That argument is completely invalid. So when you do that, you expose your lungs to all the toxins and everything for quite a bit longer, and the tar that gets deposited in the lungs is lower in the respiratory tract than cigarettes. So another point to make, which I think we'll touch on here in a little bit more, is tobacco has a range of regulation throughout the world. Cigarettes are packaged a certain way. We know what's in them. With marijuana, cannabis products, you don't necessarily have that same level of confidence that what you're smoking is what you believe you're smoking is what you're actually smoking. The risks of contamination are high. So if you consider that you're holding that smoke in longer and exposing your lungs to that smoke for a longer period of time compared to cigarettes, you also are generally unaware of what else might be in the cannabis that you're smoking. So it's just a consideration. The states that have legalized it, this is probably less of a concern because there is regulation over it. It's just something to consider when trying to compare the two. So chronic effects and other concerns with smoking cannabis. Adolescents, with their brains still developing, there is some research to suggest that long term, when they continue smoking and they enter that chronic smoking category, their brain development may become altered as they're still growing, still maturing. Not to mention dependence and poor academic performance tend to go along with heavy cannabis smoking. You got chronic bronchitis from inhalation methods, increased risks of psychosis in individuals that are predisposed to those risks to begin with, like familiar history or some sort of TBI or something. If those elements are already present and now you're consuming marijuana, the risks of psychosis increase slightly. So with the CNS depression, you also can affect your mood. Movement tends to be delayed, and short-term memory loss as well, which makes it hard to say if it's any analgesic effects are actually attributed to the THC, when these are some of the metrics that we would use to see if it is contributed to the THC. So it kind of confuses some of the data there. So again, long-term heavy use, which is kind of an ill-defined term what heavy use actually is, but it can lead to chronic health problems, particularly for the youth. Some more chronic health effects and concerns. Increased tachycardia, which we talked about just a little while ago, and the increased risk of psychosis, and myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. This appears to be very rare, but it has been reported and attributed to heavy use of marijuana. Adverse effects, again, in the study that I referenced earlier, adverse effects were anxiety and paranoia increase, lethargy and short-term memory loss, and shortness of breath. From that survey, a little over 53% said they did experience some adverse effects from THC products, and from the CBD products, about 30% saying they did have some adverse effects. Addictive potential. This is something else that I think is interesting, because any cannabis advocate would tell you that it is non-addictive, but it's just not the case. There is plenty of research to support the fact that there is addictive potential with cannabis, and that is largely due to the dopamine effect that you get from cannabis. And the problem is that the more you expose your brain to this dopamine effect, the more you need to get the same level of effect. So basically what we're getting to is building up an addiction. As your tolerance increases, you will need more to get the same effects over time. And those are pretty basic definitions of addiction. Of surveyed individuals, 49% said they did not consider themselves addicted to THC products, cannabis. 32.7% said they were, and then another 18.4% said they might be. So you have a pretty even split between people who would not say they're addicted and people who honestly say they are, or they might be addicted to cannabis. And this is just from a survey, so these are people's opinions on this. I think it's interesting to think about it that way. You've roughly got a 50-50 split here between addicted and not. Addicted or potentially addicted and not. So to say that it's not habit forming, it's not addictive, doesn't give you enough information. Cannabis use disorder, or CUD, that's a term that was coined specifically for people who are addicted to cannabis. So the medical community has actually given this its own term, again, highlighting the fact that there is addictive potential with cannabis. So there's some notable doctors, psychiatrists in the field of drug addiction. George Koob and Nora Volkow, both PhD. They're the premier experts on addiction. They have their own definitions for it, which they describe as a chronic relapsing disorder marked by compulsive drug-seeking intake, a loss of control and limiting intake, and the emergence of negative emotional state when access to a drug is prevented. They have a 3-stage model they use to define addiction, and this is in general terms, has nothing to do specifically with cannabis, just generally for drug addiction. There's the stage 1 is the binge intoxication stage, stage 2, withdrawal, negative affect, and stage 3 is a preoccupation and anticipation. So THC causes the dopamine release, which is dysregulated as you increase use. As I was talking earlier, you need more cannabis to get the same level of psychoactive results that you had previously. Over time, you increase your tolerance and you wind up consuming more and more and more. And that's, again, nothing specific to marijuana as far as the addiction goes. That's just generally how the addiction forms. But with marijuana itself, it's the dopamine release that we're seeking. So with addiction, you also have to consider withdrawals, what's going to happen. Not surprisingly, the withdrawals are irritability, increased anxiety, decreased appetite, restlessness, and sleep disturbances, which shouldn't be all that surprising considering those are the desired effects. So you remove the cannabis, and now you have you're back having the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum there with these things. But it's THC in cannabis that is giving us this addictive potential of cannabis. CBD, on the other hand, it's been used in treating the cannabis use disorder because it has antagonistic effects on the CB1 and CB2 receptors in the brain and the central nervous system. So some researchers have actually used it to combat cannabis use disorder. All right, so now all that to say, what are the effects on physical performance? So it has been shown to have a general depression of anaerobic power. So those short bursts of power that we need in virtually any sport is going to be depressed a bit when you have THC running through your system, cannabis running through your system. So it's shown decreases in VO2 max, peak work capacity, max work duration, reduced max strength, and rate of force development. C-reactive protein is a biomarker that you would get from a blood draw. It shows systemic inflammation throughout the body. And you can use that to monitor certain risks like cardiovascular disease. Cannabis consumers tend to have higher C-reactive protein levels, which actually puts them into the moderate category for cardiovascular disease. Cannabis users tend to show a slower start when anaerobic power is required. They showed this through the Wingate assessment. The cannabis users, they just generally were not able to get that starting power that they needed. But when comparing users to non-users, they found that the total work performed during the Wingate test was not significantly different. So while there is a slower start initially, they were able to make up that decrement there from the very beginning. So again, this is not advocating for or against it. These are just things that athletes should consider if they're consuming cannabis wherever they compete or whatever the decisions are. Know that your anaerobic power is a crucial aspect of so many sports. When other people are relying on you, or you're trying to get faster off the blocks or lift the weight, whatever you're trying to do, you are going to have a much slower start than the people you're competing against. And when we're comparing time, understand, like a sprint, for example, those seconds matter. Those milliseconds matter. So if you're already starting a few steps behind, you just understand that you might be in a kind of a bad way there. So generally speaking, the research on this stuff was hard to come by. I spent quite a while pulling all this research together. Some of this research is based on research that was conducted in the 70s and hasn't really been updated since. There's plenty of research that's coming out, and I think it's only a matter of time before we have some good solid stuff to go off of. But currently, there's just not a whole lot to go off of, and we're kind of interpreting things that have been done, 50 plus years ago now. And most of this research that they're extrapolating this information from is focused on health effects and potential therapeutic uses. I'm not negating that those are present, but when it comes to athletic performance, I just don't think there's enough information to say that it really improves. It's definitely not a major improvement, if any. The question is really, does it hurt? Does it hurt your performance? And at this point, I think there is a slight push in the yes category on this. Yes, it does have a declining effect to your performance. Is it monumental? Doesn't seem to be with the research, but the problem is these effects are so subjective from one individual to another. It's really hard to say if 1 gram of marijuana smoked by person A is going to have the same effects on person B. There's a lot of variables there to say, to really get this dosing correct. And I think with time we'll figure this out, but I don't know if that's coming anytime soon. But I really think that the research is coming on this with a lot of the moral, ethical, and legal concerns surrounding cannabis as states regulate this thing and it becomes more widely accepted, and not just in the United States, globally. I think the research is going to come out. We're going to probably get some good stuff in the next few years. That said, the research that is out now, there's a lot of inconsistency with the data. Some of this stuff sounds pretty scary, but then when you look at the totality of the data that's out there, it doesn't seem like it's all that bad. So can we say definitively that it is going to have all these negative health consequences? No one's going to come out and say you should be smoking marijuana because it's going to improve your health. I'm not going to hear that. I just don't think we're there yet. There are positive and adverse effects depending on the individual. There's experience with the drug, age, immaturity, physical development, any comorbidities. And if you have respiratory problems, smoking marijuana is probably not great for you, things like that. And it's something else to consider too, when we're looking at individuals in this population, the exercise science domain, these people generally have much higher, almost optimal biomarkers in virtually every aspect of health. So we're asking the question of how does this affect athletes? Well, the data is kind of skewed here with this because we're looking at people who are already in very good health. So to say that there's no consequences, it could be just that the health of these individuals is kind of masking some of the negative effects. So just to say that, is it going to increase or decrease your performance? I don't know if that's the right question. A better question might be, how is it going to improve a specific variable, a specific attribute of physical performance? Is that possible? Again, I don't think we're there yet. So as always, my references are here at the end. I welcome you to look them up so you can read this information for yourself, and we'll go from there. All right. See you next time.